Well, hello everyone, and welcome today to today's course on the key components to operating and thriving a dental practice. Welcome, glad everyone could join. I know it's busy, whether it's first thing in the morning, a little bit over lunchtime, or somewhere in between across the country. Glad you're able to join us today. My name is Ryan Cathers, and I'm one of the senior consultants here at Cirrus Consulting Group. So I myself, I lecture across the country, webinars similar to this, but as well as our seminars in person, our CE courses across the country. Was just actually in Indianapolis a couple months ago, Illinois, Virginia, and just got back from last week out of South California. So just wanted to do a quick introduction for myself, but as well as you'll be hearing later on from Jenna, who is a consultant with MNP in their organization and people practice sector. So I think before we dive into some of the detailed information of the course in terms of the first half of the presentation, more specific to the lease of the practice and the real estate aspect, I think it's a good idea to get a little bit background on us in terms of who we are, what we do, and how we support the dental community across the country. So Cirrus is a healthcare and dental specialized tenant representation firm who was founded by dentists for dentists a little over 24 years ago. And since inception, we've now actually negotiated over 10,000 dental and medical office leases across the country. And the way our firm is uniquely structured is we're essentially the only full service firm that do what we do across the country. We have everything in-house. We have an in-house legal team comprised of highly experienced real estate attorneys with a background of healthcare and tenant representation. We have an in-house leasing team who have access to rent rates and comparables in any given market. And we have an in-house consulting team which essentially work alongside the legal and leasing team to help develop a strategy for the negotiation. It was a very collaborative effort in supporting the dentist throughout all facets of the real estate. We annually represent now over 1,000 doctors each year throughout North America, and we deliver over 100 CE accredited seminars annually, similar to webinars or in-person seminars in various markets throughout the country, educating doctors on the office lease agreement and why it's important to them. We lecture at not only small society meetings or conventions, but as well as some of the major dental conventions across the country, being the Greater New York, Pacific Dental, the Yankee Dental, the California Dental Association. We really work with dentists nationwide. To give you a bit of an update on the market and rent rates and comparables that we've seen trending throughout the country. So in Boston, we've noticed the trends, as you can see here, as vacancy rates have plummeted in 2014, 2015. Currently, supply and demand, rental rates have increased. We've seen on average around the Boston area in terms of rent rates and comparables being in and around $44 a square foot. In Chicago, very similar as well. As there's less supply, demand increases. Average rental rates have been around $19.50 a square foot. Orlando, coming in around $23 a square foot, and vacancy rates approaching the 8% mark. And in San Francisco, and for our Cali folks that are out there, most of the country actually works on the yearly basis per square footage. In California and some other parts of the surrounding states, we do actually go on a monthly per square foot basis. So to give you an idea, it says a little over $31 a square foot in the San Francisco area, which is actually a $2.58 a square foot for anyone in California as well. So the purpose of today's webinar, or the Cirrus portion, is 1, how to determine if you're overpaying in rent. 2, the key steps to opening a practice and negotiating a risk-free lease agreement. How to identify the top $100,000 traps in your lease and how to negotiate the best deal with your landlord. And how to set up your lease for a smooth and profitable practice sale. So here are a few interesting facts that you may or may not know about the industry. Over 75% of dentists have office leases that can prevent them from ever selling their practice. Dentists typically have a significant personal exposure in their lease agreements, which we'll get to in a few minutes, more specifically. And dentists are highly desirable commercial tenants due to a few different reasons. 1, dentists have one of the lowest default rates as a commercial tenant, if not the lowest. They have significant investment into the leaseholds. Dentists on a per square foot basis are one of the highest investments in commercial real estate on a per square foot basis. Increased foot traffic for the plaza with patients coming in and out, and increased building value because as dentists, when we invest the large sum into our space, building it out, construction, and so forth, we look to stay long-term. And because we don't default and we sign long-term leases and stay in the space for long-term, it's immense value as a dental tenant. Landlords love to see that. What is a lease? So as I lecture across the country at our continuing education courses, I ask this very question. What's the first word that comes to mind when someone thinks of their lease? And there's a number of different answers that I get, where there's commitment, agreement, contract, relationship, but everyone thinks of this one very thing every month. It's the check that you pay to your landlord every month. Now this particular check is one of the most expensive checks you will write in your entire life. Not common for anyone outside of dentistry, but in dentistry, when you look to sign a lease, it is one of the most expensive checks you will ever write. Because when you commit to a space, you're not just committing for a month or 2 months. We typically commit for 5, 7, 10 years at a time. And in most cases, we never look to relocate a practice. So when we sign our lease, we're not just committing for 1 month again. We're committing for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years plus. So this check is actually attached to a document, whether it's 50 plus pages of legal terms and conditions. My goal today is to teach you it's not all about rent. If used properly in the negotiation, you can position yourself to win. Now, I'm not by any means suggesting we need to overpay in rent, but if utilized properly, you can be put in a position to win the negotiation. Why is the office lease so important? For a few reasons. 1, location, location, location. Our business is very dependent on the location. Depending on our needs. Are we a general dentist, specialist? What type of traffic, tenant mix that we like or need? The location is the foundation of our practice. No location, no patients, no practice. Secondly, the investment in cost. Depending on where you are in the country, It can vary depending on quality and where you are, type of building, etc. The average cost to build out a dental practice for the country is anywhere between $125 to $175 a square foot. That being said, there are areas that are well over $200 a square foot. So there's a large investment and cost to build out a dental practice. And again, those numbers are not including any equipment. That is just for the leasehold improvements, i.e. plumbing, electrical, partitions, anything we're looking to do to build out the space. It's very difficult, time-consuming, and expensive to move the practice. So what does the lease do? It binds us to the location we're in. We've just invested a large amount into the space, build out this practice, or acquire the practice. We need to make sure that we're protected. Because if we're not looking to relocate, we want to ensure we're protected while we stay. It takes anywhere on average 18 to 24 months to relocate a dental practice. From the idea of needing or wanting to relocate to finding a new space, negotiating a lease, building out the space, permits, architecture, construction till doors open. From just idea to doors open, 18 to 24 months on average to relocate a dental practice. We need to ensure we're protected from that or have planned ahead for it. And last, the lease is critical for the practice sale. It can make or break the sale of your practice. Would we prefer to have our lease act as an asset or a liability? What should your lease do for you? So again, on the topic of sale, should enhance your ability to eventually sell your practice. So it's a smooth and efficient transition at the time of sale. There's no jumps, hoops, hurdles, and so forth. Secondly, which I think many will instantly agree on as it's typically one of the main focuses, is to provide fair and affordable financial terms. And I'm not just talking about rent. Rent is one of the items, but as well as the escalations of rent each year. The option language for rent. Most of you are on what's called a triple net lease, where it's essentially any expense of the building gets passed through to the tenant. It's made up of insurance for the building, taxes of the building, and the common area maintenance, or the CAM charges of the building. Now, we're particularly focusing on the CAM charges. These are the expenses for the maintenance of the property and the upkeep. It's been known that some landlords overcharge their tenants on their CAM charges. And at the end of each year, some don't receive a statement, or some receive what's called a reconciliation statement, a general overview of what was occurred and the expenses occurred in the previous year. We need to be receiving detailed and itemized statements, and including language in the lease for the right to audit those statements to ensure what we're being charged is fair. There was a doctor who unfortunately found out that his landlord was paying his brother's corporation 4 times the average amount in the area for snow removal. It's out in Denver. We want to ensure what's being charged, when, and to whom. We need our lease to provide long-term stability and security. So in most cases, we recommend signing a 10-year term with multiple 5-year options to renew to provide us at least 20 years of predictability in the space, as we're just about to invest a large amount into it, whether we're acquiring or starting up. We need predictability for the practice. In addition, when we look to eventually sell, banks need anywhere between 8 to 10 years of term left on the lease, whether that's in the form of initial term or option language, to finance an acquisition of practice. We also need to ensure the options are transferable. We want to minimize risk and exposure. Many of us, whether we know it or not, have either personally signed our lease or have provided a personal guarantee, which essentially states if you're ever in a dispute with yourself and the landlord can come after you personally, your personal assets. We'll touch on that in a little bit more detail in a couple minutes. We want to maximize our flexibility. So for example, incorporating in a right of first refusal to expand into the lease, which essentially states if an adjacent space next to you becomes vacant, the landlord has to come to you first prior to any of the tenants and prior to marketing it publicly or providing you first right for a bona fide offer. Many different ways it can be structured, but it's an expansion option. So an option, not an obligation. Provides for future growth. What are 3 key saleable components of your dental practice? So many of you may know. First being equipment, the depreciated value. Second, being goodwill for patients. And anytime I lecture across the country, I always ask the question, what does goodwill mean to you? And since this is a one-way webinar, I'll answer. It answers whether it's the reputation of the current doctor, the transitioning with the new doctor, the patient attrition, many different answers, but how do we quantify that? How do we quantify goodwill? Regardless of how many patients are on the book, active patients. The bottom line, how they find a number, is through production. What is the practice producing? What's the bottom line? What's the profit loss? And that's how they're able to quantify goodwill. The third aspect being the lease, the location. These are the 3 key saleable points. Now, I also asked this question to give you a bit of an example. So if I was looking to sell my practice for $1 million, appraised at $1 million, looking to sell it for $1 million, and my question to you is, what percentage of that valuation can the lease impact? And if I'm looking to sell my practice for $1 million, what percentage of that evaluation can my lease impact? The answer is 100%. By no means am I suggesting the lease is worth 100% of the appraisal value, but it could impact 100% of the value, which we'll get to in a couple minutes. What is in your lease? So one of the provisions in your lease that many of you may or may not be familiar of, but you will be at some point in your career, called the assignment and subletting section of your lease. It essentially outlines the transferability of your lease in the event that you look to sell the practice. So this provision right here is found in 75% of the dental leases that we review. And again, we represent over 1,000 doctors each year. And this is found in 75% of them, many of which have been negotiated by quote-unquote dental-specific real estate attorneys. So now, given the time, I know we're over lunch, we're going to go through it all together. So what it states is if the tenant should wish to assign or sublet the lease premises, it shall first have received the consent of the landlord. So in order to transfer the lease and sell your practice, you need to ask the landlord's permission to do so. Some leases may say, which consent shall not be unreasonably withheld. Very similarly, what is the definition of unreasonable? Everyone's different. Very common to need consent to transfer the lease, upon which process and provisions and conditions of which that consent is applied. It goes on to say any such request Any request for such consent, shall be in writing within 15 days following the receipt by a landlord of such request for consent. The landlord shall have the option to 1. Approve the tenant's request to assign the lease or sublet the premises. 2. Decline tenant's request to assign the lease or sublet the premises. And/or 3. To terminate the lease agreement upon the effective date of such proposed lease assignment or sublet. Essentially meaning the landlord can 1. Grant the transfer, 2. Decline, or 3. Terminate your lease. What is your practice worth if they terminate your lease? It goes on to say, additionally, should the landlord consent to an assignment or sublet of the premises, the landlord shall have the right to revise the minimum rent to be paid during the remainder of the term to the greater of the then current market rent for the leased premises or 15% greater than the then current rent. Meaning, even if the landlord consents to the transfer, rent is going up at least 15%. If the current market rent is higher, it's much higher than that. Could be problematic for a buyer. Would they walk away? Would they ask for a discount on the practice as the evaluation is now off? Goes on to say, furthermore, should tenant receive from the assignee or subtenant any rental income, cash, goods, or any form of consideration in connection with the assignment of the lease or sublet of the premises that is over and above the current base rental rates payable to the landlord in any fiscal year during the term of the lease, the difference between the annual rental rate and such rental income, cash, goods, or other consideration shall be paid to the landlord directly within 30 days of the tenant's receipt thereof. Meaning, in layman's terms, it's sale proceeds language. Meaning you look to sell your practice for $1 million, the landlord's entitled to a percentage of that. A percentage of your blood, sweat, and tears that you've put into this practice. You owe it to them. We were involved in a situation about a month and a half ago where a doctor who had been in the space 32 years, a general dentist, who, the landlord was actually a patient of his for 17 of them, and had conditionally sold his practice based on the lease transfer. So as per his lease, he went to his landlord to ask for consent, and the landlord replied saying absolutely on one of 3 conditions. 1, the rents increased 30%. 2, you pay me 50% of the sale proceeds, 50. Or 3, I terminate your lease. Fortunately, because this language wasn't addressed, it put him in that position. It goes on to say, notwithstanding the landlord's consent to any assignment or subletting, the tenant shall not be released from its obligations under the lease and shall remain liable for any failure of the tenant or its assignees or subtenants to observe each and every covenant of the lease. Meaning if the landlord consents to the transfer, you will remain liable for the lease obligations and there's no expiry. So both yourself as the tenant and potentially as the guarantor, if you personally guaranteed the lease or are personally signed. Received a call at the end of last year from a doctor who sold his practice, moved down to Florida. 8 years later, received a call on the beach. Buyer had defaulted. As you can see in this one provision, how many different items need to be amended. And again, this is found in 75% of the leases that we review. We represent over 1,000 doctors each year. Did you know most commercial tenants, dentists included, have agreed to provide their landlords with unconditional personal guarantees? Huge detriment to your practice investment. This is a provision found in 90% of leases, a personal guarantee. As an inducement to the landlord to accept this lease, The tenant hereby agrees with the landlord that the tenant and guarantor shall unconditionally bound to the landlord for their performance of all obligations of the tenant under this lease for the initial term and any option to renew. Meaning, as you continue to extend the lease and their options, you remain personally guaranteeing the lease. There's no limitations, no caps, no expiry. If you add on options to renew, it continues as well. The tenant guarantee and save harmless the landlord against all liabilities, damages, claims, fines, penalties, costs, and other expenses. The tenant hereby covenants that following the execution and delivery of the landlord's standard lease, the execution and delivery of the guarantor form shall accompany the landlord's standard lease. Meaning when you execute the lease and this guarantee, again, whether you've personally signed the lease or your lease is under your corporation, you've signed a separate guarantee, it remains personal. Which means, and again, in the dispute, they can come after you and your personal assets. We need to be incorporating what's called a death and disability provision. This is essentially how we got our name a little over 24 years ago. If you're no longer able to work due to disability, you or your state have the ability to terminate the lease if properly drafted. Essentially gives you an option to get out. God forbid something happens. Because God forbid something happens to you, doctor gets in the car, an accident happens, you still are liable for the lease, you and or your estate. We need to provide these types of protections. These are a number of the other office traps, or other traps in your office lease, rather. We've only gone through 2 of them, and this is not limited to. There are many others as well. We haven't talked about a redevelopment right to terminate your lease, relocation rights, and make you pay for it, restoration clauses, holding over, subordination, etc. There are many, many detrimental provisions in your lease that could be potentially detrimental. In terms of the tenant lease cycle, what is the ideal timing to begin these negotiations? So if we're a tenant currently in a space and we are looking to renew, we recommend beginning the negotiations 24 months prior to the expiry for a few reasons. One, as we mentioned earlier in the webinar, on average it's 18 to 24 months to relocate a practice. It gives us time. Majority of cases, we do not look to relocate, but it gives the perception that we have the ability to if the negotiations aren't fair. As well as there's an option deadline for your option to renew. Critical date. Your lease expiry isn't the only date you need to have circled in your calendar. Many of which have an option to renew deadline, whether it's 3, 6, 9, 12 months, or some sort of combination. You miss that, you lose your option to renew as well. 24 months gives us leverage in the negotiations to put us in a position to get the best deal. Strategies and tactics for winning the lease negotiation. So this is our Cirrus process for winning lease negotiations. It's an 8-step process, very detailed through the whole process. Ensuring we have all the documents executed by both parties. We're properly identifying our practice goals and our career goals, so the lease works around us and we don't work around the lease. Review everything in detail. Prepare our market research in terms of rent rates and comparables. Develop a strategy. All of this prior to even reaching out to the landlord and beginning negotiations. And then we go into economics, legal terms, and the final review and execution of the lease. Because we don't assume the landlord is a nice guy who puts everything we've negotiated and agreed upon into the final copy of the lease. Fortunately, that's just not the case. Some key takeaways. We want to ensure the details of your dental office lease are set up to maximize your practice investment. We want to be strategic. You don't get what you deserve get what you negotiate into your lease. Have your dental office lease reviewed by a professional leasing expert to ensure you're set up for a smooth and profitable transition down the line. And start the negotiation process early. If you're planning to retire in the next 10 years or less, now is the time to start planning. Critical dates and risk analysis. This is one of the services we provide here at Cirrus, essentially a lease review. What it essentially entails, the $1,500 value, $1,495. It's essentially an economic and legal analysis of your lease. Our leasing team spends time doing a dive into the market, the rent rates and comparables in the building and the local area, as well as looking at our proprietary data. Again, we've negotiated over 10,000 dental-specific leases. Our legal team goes through the legal terms and provisions in detail, highlights all the risks and exposures. We then schedule a call with you, typically about an hour long, and go through your plan, your vision, all of the details of the lease, and set you up with essentially a treatment plan for it. Now, because you have attended the webinar today, you actually receive your lease review and consultation complimentary. So that $1,500 value is waived, so you do receive the lease review and analysis complimentary for that. So I myself, from Cirrus, certainly thank you for joining us today. We do have Jenna speaking on their behalf, but do certainly appreciate everyone for joining. But I did want to introduce Jenna, Sweiss as well. She's going to be speaking on the other side. She's one of the consultants at MNP, so again in their organization and people practice. She's been in the dental community for over 7 years and has supported dentists through the purchase and sale of a dental practice. And she also teaches at the Department of Administrative Studies at York University. So I want to pass that over to her. Jenna, it's all yours.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. So as Ryan has mentioned, I've been actively involved in evaluating dental practices and conducting due diligence reviews to ensure practices are worth their list price. Today, what I want to do is talk about some of the intangible elements that I believe are key to defining the value of the practice and how we can use these elements to essentially augment the practice value and do this through delivering patient-centered services. So there's really 3 ways in which patient-centric service can add value. The first is by supporting you in optimizing your profitability by developing streamlined service delivery model. It can also support you in attracting and retaining the right talent. This is particularly key to transitioning a practice. From my personal experience, I have seen dentists try to safeguard a transition through the inclusion of non-compete and non-solicitation clauses. And yet, despite the inclusion of these things in a transition, they continue to encounter difficulty with trying to transition a team, which is a difficult process and requires an important strategy to be set in place to support in this transition. It can also really help in preparing a practice for sale because it sends a message to prospective buyers that you have a well-developed and well-thought-out business model, and that this model will remain intact even as the practice is sold. So for today, I wanted to discuss how we define practice value and how we can add value to our practice through implementing a patient-centric service model. I'll discuss what a patient-centric service model is, as well as how to create it within your practices, and how it starts with developing a very clear patient-centric vision. I will then touch on a little bit about MNP's dental niche and the different services that we have available to support dentists. So as Ryan discussed, there's different components that come into play in terms of trying to define the value of a practice. And it really is a composite of many different factors. The first of these is having a well-defined business model. This is evident through things such as a healthy cash flow and established and defined business processes. The second component to this is assets and equipment, so looking at both your clinical and business technology. The third, as Ryan has discussed, is location, so things like your practice lease, demographics, and the community in which your practice exists. And lastly, and the key component that I'm going to be discussing today, is looking at your patient base and the goodwill. So not only looking at the number of active charts, but also some of those intangible elements, such as how to retain those active charts post-transition, which is ultimately trying to retain the value of your practice and is a key preoccupation for dentists looking to buy a practice. So to begin, ultimately, what is patient-centric service? It's about positioning the patient at the center of everything you do. It's about designing a service or solution around the unique needs and circumstances of that patient. Within your dental practice, this looks like you and your team listening to, informing, and respecting patients in their dental care journey, as well as responding to patients' individual differences, needs, and values to ensure that their values are able to guide all decisions. It's about shaping the patient journey in ways that support positive outcomes for their oral and overall health. So why is patient-centric service important and valuable to your practice? Well, in designing services around the unique needs of patients, it helps to relieve anxiety, eliminate any surprises around financial costs, and ensures that patients have been listened to throughout the process. As a result, patients will stay with your practice longer, will spend more money over time, and recommend your services to others. This organic word-of-mouth growth of your practice is key to attracting and retaining patients and is ultimately what will drive your practice growth and value. To support dentists in creating a patient-centric service model, we've developed this framework that demonstrates the various business levers available to you and how these business levers can be used in ways to shape the patient journey and ensure positive outcomes for patients. These levers include having a clear service vision, which are ultimately the principles that you stand for and should come through in how you engage your patients. Business processes that are defined and are key mechanisms to knowledge retention and ensuring that valuable information, resources, and relationships don't leave with the departing owner or any particular team member. Technology, which, as I will demonstrate, often drives up the dollar value of a practice and is critical to delivering services, but is no guarantee of the value of a practice on its own. The employee experience, and how you're able to effectively attract and retain talent that reflect the values that you stand for. And lastly, your practice culture, which is the intangible feeling that patients get when they walk into your practice and impacts how they feel after they leave, and will ultimately decide whether they will return. So the first lever in building a patient-centric service experience is to develop a vision. A vision is key as it serves as the guiding principles. Some of the guiding principles around patient-centric service delivery include providing patients with the information, resources, and support they need to make the right decisions related to their oral health, ensuring that patients feel that you understand and care about their unique needs, efforts to reduce patients' feelings of vulnerability through the coordination of care, for example, post-op care calls or following up on referrals, alleviating patient anxiety by being upfront about financial costs as well as overall treatment and accessing services, providing continuity in services and support through ongoing treatment planning, and following up on following up with patients and scheduling them in a manner that supports their retention and improves the accessibility of the services you provide. Once you've clearly defined your service, your patient-centric service vision, you'll have to outline how you're going to deliver on these services. It is critical to understand how you currently are delivering services and recognize if there's any gaps between your vision of how you want to deliver these services and what you're currently doing. Having defined business processes is key to optimizing the profitability of your practice and preparing a practice for sale, because it not only sends a message that you have a well thought out business model, it also ensures that these processes will remain intact through the process of transitioning or selling a practice. Having defined business processes will support you with the following: streamlining your services to ensure an efficient approach to service delivery that is centered around the patient, creating consistency as a means of ensuring key events that shape the patient journey are not overlooked. It also supports with retaining critical knowledge and relationships, as these standardized and defined processes will remain even with turnover. And also supports with performance management by establishing clear expectations for team members that can be used and leveraged for performance management and training. I would suggest that all dentists participating today think about defining and mapping their key business processes, and as well as thinking about the outcomes that they would like for their patients, and ensuring that they design these processes around these particular outcomes. Some priority processes that dentists should consider documenting include the new patient experience, the client confirmation process, time of service collections process, and the recall booking process. Another key business lever is looking at technology. As I mentioned at the beginning, practice technology in and of itself maintains little intrinsic value. I've seen numerous practices that have been outfitted with state-of-the-art equipment and technology and yet have not been able to successfully build a patient base. And so really this technology is not very helpful. Technology in and of itself only adds so much value and can easily become obsolete. The real investment and value in technology within a dental practice is based on the ability for teams to use the technology to deliver key services in a client-centric and streamlined way. For example, we understand for most of the patient experience in a dental office, patients are often in a dental chair, unable to speak with their mouths open. This means that all the events leading up to and after treatment are so critical. It also means that technology can be leveraged to help bring patients along that journey. For example, using oral cameras and digital x-rays to demonstrate patients how you will perform treatment will also help to quell any patient anxiety. Ultimately, technology adds value when it is enabling you to achieve your service vision and can be leveraged to manage and efficiently execute on your business processes. Another important lever for you to consider is your employees and their overall employee experience. Particularly in the context of preparing a practice for sale, transitioning employees is a critical consideration. The relationships that employees have with your patients significantly shape on the patient journey, and your HR practices throughout the employment life cycle impact on the level of employee engagement and the quality of service that they will provide. Developing a patient-centric service model requires thinking about how you are attracting and recruiting individuals whose values align to those of your practice and your service vision. It also requires you to think about how you will onboard these staff to ensure they understand and can deliver on the services in ways that are in line with your vision. Ongoing coaching and performance management are key to ensuring that these service standards that you have outlined are being upheld, as well as creating opportunities for professional development and feedback to support performance improvement. Lastly, and one of the most key factors, is to think about how staff will exit your practice and ensuring that there are mechanisms in place to support knowledge transfer and to maintain important patient transitions through attrition. The last lever that I think dentists should consider in developing a patient-centric service model is to look at the culture of their practice. Your ability to deliver patient-centric services and positively shape your patient journey is influenced by your practice culture, and ultimately you can shape the culture of your practice. Culture refers to the prevailing values, norms, and behaviors that guide the way employees think, feel, and act, and is often described as how we do things around here. Ultimately, culture will define what a practice is like to work for, how they treat their patients, and what their fundamental beliefs and work ethics are. Your practice culture will impact on your ability to attract and retain patients, and attract and retain the right staff. You can shape your practice culture to be more patient-centric by focusing on the key events throughout the patient and employee experience that have the ability to influence on patient outcomes, and by identifying key business and technological levers and enablers that support employees in engaging in the desired patient-centered behaviors. So in summary, you can deliver patient-centered services and augment the value of your practice by developing a patient-centered service vision, mapping and defining key processes that help you in executing on this vision, leveraging your clinical and business technology in your delivery of these patient-centered services, working to manage the employee experience throughout the HR lifecycle, and implementing mechanisms to support with their professional development as well as performance management, as well as shaping your practice culture by using business and technological enablers to solicit the desired patient-centered behaviors from your employees that you would like. MNP's dental niche. With over 1,800 dental clients, we have spent a significant amount of time investing time and resources into understanding the needs of Canadian dentists. And in addition to many of our traditional services that we have provided dentists, such as accounting and insurance, we also offer a whole gambit of other services, such as tax planning, management advice, human resources management, valuations, succession and retirement planning, as well as wealth management and financial planning. You can visit the link below to receive any additional information, and of course happy to answer any of your questions and support you in any capacity that we can. And that's all I have today. Thanks, Ryan.
Thanks, Jenna. So if anybody has any questions for myself on the commercial real estate side of the practice, or if you are interested in the lease review as well, we will be putting up a polling system. If you have any questions for Jenna and at MMP, feel free to reach out. Her contact information is there on the page as well. Or if you do need it, feel free to reach out to myself as well, and happy to guide you in the right direction to her. Or if you like, just write it down now. But we will be putting up the polling system. Again, if you have any questions for myself or Jenna, feel free to reach out anytime. But thank you for everyone for joining us today. I know it's been a busy day through our lunchtime or early morning, depending on where we are throughout the country. Certainly appreciate it and glad everyone could join. Have a great day.